From our central London studio, Dr. Benjamin Bowling, who's an expert in policing, based at King's College, London. Benjamin, welcome to you. Outside of tyrannies, for policing to be effective, the thinking runs, there has to be policing by consent. That's the phrase we often hear, isn't it? And to have policing consent, you have to have trust and confidence that the police deliver justice in a fair-minded way. It does feel, at least in that part of Missouri we're talking about at the moment, in Ferguson, that consent seems to have vanished.
There seems to be no consent, there's no trust, there's no confidence. And I think that when you realise that the grand jury has not even brought the officer to justice, has refused even to, or declined even to, bring the facts fully to an open court for the officer to face an investigation and charges for shooting an unarmed man is quite astonishing. And I think that the issue of conscience that comes from the officer is very telling. The idea that you can shoot an unarmed man in the face, in the street, in 21st century America, and to feel that your conscience is entirely clear, that the conscience of a law enforcement agency and an officer is clear, to me speaks volumes to the problems and the depth of the lack of confidence and trust, and indeed the problems of the abuse of force in policing in the USA.
Our reporter there, Greg Milam, just drew a parallel with the case of Rodney King back in 1991, the famous stroke infamous case that sparked so much rioting there. A key difference then was that what happened then was visible to all the world. We all made our minds up, didn't we? We saw the footage and we were surprised by the fact that the law enforcement agencies then came up with a result which was very different from what most right-minded people would think, having looked at the footage. Here it's different. We don't know. We don't really know what happened. There's a grand jury of 12 men and women who've looked at the evidence that, as you say, was not made public, but they've seen it. They've come up, they say, with contradictions in the testimony, which they say was embellished. Some witnesses just told outright lies. That there is a problem here in terms of making our mind up. We just listened to the testimony of Darren Wilson there. The way he tells it, he was just doing his duty.
Well, I think there are two issues here. The first thing is, well, now the evidence is made public. It's something like 24 volumes of evidence. There are dozens and dozens of witness statements. There's all the forensic reports. But what normally happens in a grand jury case, what the prosecutor normally does is to review the evidence, him or herself, to carry out the investigation, and then to make a recommendation to the grand jury, and then for a decision to be taken about whether to go to trial, and for that evidence then to be tested in public rather than seen as it was in the first instance in private. And I think that what this has done is to kind of wrong foot the public, if you like, because it means that we don't actually see the evidence. You can review it now, it's all available online, but the decision-making process in action is invisible. But I think the key point which unites all of the issues of for example, Rodney King and the other police shootings, is the failure of American law enforcement and policing to act within the law. There's a very strong sense that the police here are acting above the law. And the idea that a police officer can say that they can shoot somebody effectively in cold blood without facing the consequences, to feel that their conscience is clear. And I think this will resonate with many police officers across the USA who feel that their duty is to control black populations, to use whatever force is necessary, even though to most other people this would clearly be excessive force.
On the question of demographics, and this, perhaps there's some read over here into what happens in the UK, in certain parts of the UK as well. When you've got a situation, as has happened in Ferguson, Missouri, where a neighbourhood which was, 50 years ago predominantly white over a period of time becomes predominantly black, but still has a police force which is overwhelmingly white, presumably the answer, we all agree the answer therefore is to make the police force more representative of the community which it serves. In practice, that can be harder than it sounds, can't it?
Yes, it can, but I think that there are two fundamental principles here. One is a basic equality of opportunity and diversity issue, and that is that the state, represented here by the police service, should, as a matter of course, as a matter of principle, represent the community that it serves. And secondly, there's the issue of would a community which is more, if you like, understanding of the diversity of the community act in ways that are more appropriate? Would there be more confidence and trust in a police service which more accurately represents the community that it serves? And it would do. That's not the only issue here, though, I don't think, because I think that there is a sense of fraternity across many police officers, irrespective of race and ethnicity. This is a really, for me, a fundamental issue about a law enforcement organisation, a police service, and this applies in many places across the USA with more diverse police forces such as Chicago and New York. There's a fundamental lack of trust between police and public. The police seem to act above the law and seem to act in ways that are not properly held accountable to law or to the wider community.
Ben, this is a question as much, I suppose, for us here at Sky News and other news organisations as it is for you, but it was raised certainly by one of our email correspondents this morning who was just nonplussed, couldn't understand why we were talking about this as if it was a problem happening here in the UK, not 4,000 miles away. There are many answers to that question, I suppose. What's yours?
Well, I think that the part of it is around our perceptions of the United States of America as a land of the free, as a country which represents liberty and represents justice, which clearly is failing a significant section.
But we can imagine, can't we, Ben? We can imagine in many parts of the world, one ethnic group is not necessarily oppressing, but being less than helpful towards another ethnic group, but we're simply not reporting it, are we?
Well, I think that this is not a universal by any means, because you find oppressive police forces in countries with more homogenous populations, whether that's Jamaica, for example, or populations where diversity is more complex, such as Brazil. For me, this is fundamentally an issue about state power. It's the power of the state, of the police, to act in ways against the community. Now, policing, it seems to me, should be about liberty, it should be about expanding justice, it should be about doing the right thing. And the police officer in the incident said that he felt, Officer Wilson said that he felt he'd done the right thing. To me, this is absolutely extraordinary. The police are there to make communities safe. How on earth is it possible to consider shooting somebody in the face to be a way to make a community safe? And obviously what's also happened from that is the perceptions of the experiences of injustice have fanned out much more broadly to affect the wider members of the community through the, I think, understandable anger and disappointment, which has led to rioting. The issue for me is...
But you don't condone that rioting, do you? I mean,
No,
it's the old story,
not.
isn't it? The people very often affected by, businesses being torched and cars being torched are the very people who have been protested on behalf of.
Absolutely no. I don't condone those by any means, but what I can see is that the anger and the resentment and the frustration and the disappointment in the failure of American criminal justice leads to those riots. And I think that this is an issue for police organisations around the world, including Britain. It's about ensuring that the police service represents the community it serves, that the police officers act within the law and are properly accountable to the law and accountable to the wider community.
Benjamin Bowling's an expert in policing at King's College London. Benjamin, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning.
Thank you.